Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. Before we start, I want to give a short explanation. Adolf Hitler ruled Nazi Germany as a dictator from 1933 to 1945. He started the Second World War, caused millions of deaths, and led one of the darkest periods in human history. We are not sharing this story to defend him. We are also not telling it to attack him. This video is meant only for learning, to help you understand history, practice English, and see what truly happened during his final 24 hours. If you want to learn about his entire life, you can find the full biography on our channel. But today, we focus only on his last day, the moment when everything ended. The story is told like a film, but it is based on real events. Welcome to the final day of a man the world will always remember. This is not a political message. It is not made to praise or blame anyone. It is simply about one point in history. The final 24 hours of Adolf Hitler. A man who once stood before huge crowds was now completely alone. A man who once led armies was now sitting underground, waiting for the end. Today, we will walk through those last hours. We will enter the bunker. We will imagine how the walls shook as bombs exploded above. We will see the fear in the faces of those who stayed with him until the last moment. And yes, this story is also useful for English listening practice. We use real events, clear storytelling, and strong vocabulary, so you can improve your English while learning about one of the most intense days in history. Let's begin. Part 1, April 29th, 1945. The bunker, the bride, and the breaking point. It is late at night. The world above is in flames. But underground, in the cold concrete bunker beneath Berlin, time feels slower. Hitler, now 56, sits alone. He understands a war is lost. He knows the Soviet army is taking the city street by street. He knows death is coming soon. And yet, he makes a strange choice. He tells his assistant to prepare a wedding. Tonight, he says, he will marry Eva. After 14 years of silence about their relationship, he chooses the end of the world to marry her. Eva Braun had been with him since she was 17. She waited out of the public eye, never shown beside him in photos or speeches. For 14 years, she stayed loyal in the background. She had tried to end her life twice, not because of harm from him, but because she felt invisible. Still, she stayed. She believed in him. In his final days, she refused every chance to leave the bunker. That is when he understood that her loyalty was not for power or money, but blind devotion. Now, with the city falling and the walls shaking, he decided she should have his name, even if only for a few hours. It was not a romantic choice. It was about control, ritual, and closure. He wanted everything arranged before he died. A marriage, a will, a final speech, a planned death. The goodbye had begun. In a small, dim room, the wedding took place. There were no flowers or music, only the sound of pens on paper and distant explosions. Eva wore a pale blue silk dress. Her face was calm, almost too calm. People later said she smiled as if she fully accepted everything. Hitler wore a plain black suit, without medals or uniform. A civil officer asked the usual questions. He answered yes, and after 14 years they were married. The staff tried to celebrate. A small table was set, champagne was opened, but no one felt like drinking. One officer later said it felt more like a funeral than a wedding. After the ceremony, Hitler returned to his desk. With a shaking hand, he dictated his final political statement. His secretary typed every word. He did not apologize. He did not show regret. He blamed Jews for the war, accused his generals of betrayal, and claimed history would understand him. Then he gave a clear order. He did not want his body captured. It must be burned. He remembered what happened to Mussolini and refused the same fate. He signed the document slowly, his last command, It was almost 5 in the morning. He lay down, not to sleep but to wait. Above ground, Berlin was collapsing. Inside the bunker, time felt frozen, though bombs shook the earth. Eva sat beside him, holding his hand. This was both their honeymoon and their funeral. Hitler's valet brought him a simple breakfast, dry bread, some honey, and tea. He ate very little. He looked thinner than ever. His face aged quickly, and his right hand shook constantly. His eyes seemed empty, and his voice was weak and quiet. He did not talk about war, escape, or hope. He simply sat in silence with Eva near him while bombs continued to hit the city above. Then a message arrived. He learned that Heinrich Himmler, one of his closest men for many years, had tried to negotiate peace with the Allies behind his back. Hitler stared at the report for a long moment. Suddenly he exploded with anger. He shouted, screamed, and hit the table. He called Himmler a traitor. He ordered Himmler's arrest. Although deep inside, he understood that no one was left to carry out the order. His system was falling apart. For the first time, Hitler looked truly defeated. His eyes went blank. He leaned back in his chair, and he knew the end had started. By noon, the air in the bunker grew heavier. There was no fresh oxygen, no sunlight, only fear and stale air. Hitler slowly walked into the map room, where strategies had once been created. In the past, he had stood there with generals, giving commands and pointing at borders. Now the maps meant nothing. The war was lost, and the empire was ruined. He looked at the maps not to plan, but to remember. These maps had once shown victories. Now they showed the graves of broken dreams. He barely spoke. His body trembled, and his legs felt weak. His personal doctor offered him medicine, but he refused. He knew this wasn't a war room anymore. It was a museum of his failures. Hitler had one companion he trusted more than anyone, his German shepherd, Blondie. She had lived with him for years, slept beside him, and stayed loyal without question. But now Hitler called his doctor, Dr. Werner Hasse, and told him to bring the cyanide capsules. He wanted to test them on Blondie. He no longer trusted anyone, not even the people closest to him. He was afraid that someone might give him fake poison, so he would suffer. The doctor placed a capsule in Blondie's mouth. The dog died within seconds. Hitler said nothing. He simply looked away. This was his proof that the poison worked and that he could use it himself. For many in the bunker, this moment changed everything. When Hitler killed his own dog, the one creature he truly cared about, they understood he had no intention of escaping or surviving. He had chosen death. But it did not stop there. Eva's 2 Scottish terriers, Wolf and Stassi, were killed next. Even Blondie's puppies, only a few weeks old, were poisoned by Hitler's dog handler. Hitler did not want to leave anything behind. No animals, no memories, no symbols. If he was going to die, everything connected to him had to disappear. That afternoon, Hitler gathered the officers who still remained. They had served him for many years, but now they were standing before a man who looked tired, pale, and nearly lifeless. Some begged him once more to escape. They told him there was still a plane, that they could disguise him, that they could help him flee south. But he slowly shook his head. He said he would not run. He would not be captured. He told them he would stay in Berlin and die in Berlin. Some were shocked. Some were scared. Some felt strangely relieved because now they believed they could try to escape without feeling guilty. Hitler allowed those who wanted to leave to do so. Many prepared to escape through the sewers at night, though most of them would die on the way. Hitler, however, was finished. He stopped giving meaningful orders. He stopped caring about the outside world. Back in his room, he sat beside Eva. She had changed into a simple dark blue dress. She wore no makeup and no jewelry. She had not cried at all that day. She looked ready to die. Hitler told her she still had time to leave and save herself. She refused with a soft smile, saying she would stay with him. Her choice was not romantic. It was pure, blind loyalty. They sat quietly. No conversation, no music, only the distant sounds of the city collapsing. Hitler then called his secretaries and aides one by one. He shook their hands and dismissed them. He did not give long speeches. He simply thanked them and told them they could go. One secretary later said he looked like a ghost, polite, yet already gone inside. Some cried. Some held his hand too long. But Hitler remained emotionless, as if he had already left the world. This moment marked the end of an era. Those who once surrounded him as if he were a king now walked away, leaving him alone with Eva and with his coming death. It was now evening on April 30th, 1945. Just a few hours remained. Outside the bunker, the Soviet army was only a few streets away. The walls shook with every explosion. Dust fell from the ceiling. But inside Hitler's private room, everything was strangely calm. Hitler sat at a small table with Eva Braun. A simple lunch was served, pasta and a light tomato sauce. Hitler barely touched the food. Eva tried to eat a little, but her hands were shaking. The room was silent, except for distant gunfire. Hitler then asked everyone to leave him alone for a short time. Guards and staff stayed outside the door, waiting for the final moment. Inside, Hitler and Eva spoke quietly. No one knows exactly what they said, because no one else was allowed in. Some historians think they discussed their first meeting. Others believe they talked about the future they would never have. But most agree the conversation was short, calm, and almost cold. Finally, around 3:30 in the afternoon, Hitler opened the door and called in his two remaining staff members, his valet and his personal secretary. He told them the time had come. They handed him a pistol and gave Eva a cyanide capsule. Hitler dismissed them with a quiet, "Thank you." Then the door closed for the last time. Outside the room, the staff waited in complete silence. Some cried softly. Others stared at the floor. A few whispered prayers. They all knew what was about to happen. Inside the room, Hitler sat on one end of the sofa. Eva sat beside him. She placed a cyanide capsule in her mouth. Hitler lifted the pistol. At around 3:45 p.m., two sounds were heard, a gunshot and a soft thud as two bodies fell back onto the couch. The guards opened the door. Hitler was leaning to his left, blood on his temple, the gun still in his hand. Eva was on the other side, her body still, the cyanide capsule having done its work within seconds. She looked peaceful, as if asleep. There was no time for tears, no time for hesitation. Hitler had left clear instructions. His body must be burned so that no enemy could use it for propaganda. His guards wrapped the two bodies in blankets and carried them up the narrow stairs to the garden outside the bunker. The air smelled of smoke, dust, and destruction. Shells were falling nearby. They placed the bodies side by side in a small crater caused by a bomb. The closest officers saluted for the last time. Then they poured gasoline over the bodies. One man lit a rag, waited for a moment, and threw it onto corpses. A large flame rose into the air. The bodies burned quickly, the fire pushed by the wind of the explosions around them. Some officers cried. Some stood expressionless. Others turned away, unable to watch. The flames consumed the last physical remains of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. The fire burned for several hours. When the gasoline ran out, the flames weakened, leaving only charred remains. Explosions continued to shake the garden. The smoke mixed with dust and drifted across the ruined city. Back in the bunker, silence filled the halls. Everyone knew the world had just changed forever. The man who once believed he could control Europe had died in a small underground room, with only a handful of people left to witness it. Above ground, the Soviet army continued moving forward. Berlin was falling. The final chapter of Nazi Germany was closing. The news of Hitler's death spread to the bunker slowly, almost like a whisper. At first, people didn't react. Some didn't believe it. Some felt numb. Others simply sat down, staring into space, unsure what to do next. For many, it was as if a strange weight had been lifted. Hitler had ruled every part of their lives for years. Now, suddenly, he was gone. There was no leader to give orders, no voice telling them what to do. Only fear remained. Fear of the Soviets. Fear of the future. Fear of what would happen to them once the war was officially lost. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, now became the highest-ranking figure in the bunker. He had been loyal to Hitler until the very end. He admired him almost religiously. Now that Hitler was dead, Goebbels took command, at least symbolically. But he knew there was nothing left to control. Berlin was collapsing. The army was broken, and most officials were already trying to escape. Despite this, Goebbels announced that he would not leave the city. He said he and his family would remain in Berlin and share the same fate. His wife, Magda Goebbels, agreed. She believed a world without National Socialism was not worth living in. Her 6 children were brought to the bunker, unaware of the terrible decision their parents had already made. Meanwhile, other officers in the bunker argued about what to do next. Some wanted to negotiate a surrender to save lives. Others wanted to fight until the last bullet. But nothing they discussed mattered. The Soviets were already outside the doors. Around this time, General Krebs attempted to negotiate with the Soviet commander, Marshal Zhukov. Krebs carried a message saying Hitler was dead and asked for a ceasefire. But the Soviets demanded unconditional surrender. Krebs had no authority to agree to that, and the meeting ended with no result. When Krebs returned to the bunker, everyone understood the truth. There would be no deal, no rescue, no escape. Inside, the atmosphere grew darker. People could hear Soviet tanks rolling over the streets above. Gunfire echoed through the halls. Every hour, more rooms shook. Food was almost gone, water was running out, and the electricity flickered constantly. That evening, Goebbels made his final decision. He and his wife would take their own lives, but first, they would kill their children. Magda believed they must not live in a world without the ideology she worshipped. One by one, the 6 children were given strong sedatives. Once they were asleep, a doctor gave them poison. They died silently in their beds. After the children were dead, Goebbels and Magda went upstairs to the garden, close to the place where Hitler's body had been burned earlier. They sat together. Goebbels bit down on a cyanide capsule, while Magda did the same. A guard then shot their bodies to make sure they could not survive. Their corpses were burned, but the fire was weak, so the remains were left half-burned in the open. With their deaths, the Nazi leadership had nearly destroyed itself completely. Only a few officers, soldiers, and staff were left in the bunker. Some prepared to surrender. Others planned to escape through tunnels, hoping they might reach the American or British lines. But most of them knew the chance of survival was extremely small. As night fell over Berlin, the bunker grew quiet. The man who once controlled almost all of Europe was gone. His most loyal followers were dead. His empire was in ruins. And above ground, the city that had once been the heart of his power was now a burning battlefield filled with chaos. The end was only hours away. By the morning of May 1st, the bunker felt completely different. No one walked with purpose anymore. People moved slowly, quietly, some with empty eyes, some trembling from fear. The air was thick, warm, and smelled of smoke, sweat, and the chemicals used to clean the floors. There was no natural light, and almost no electricity. Every sound from outside made people jump. General Wilhelm Burgdorf and General Hans Krebs, who had stayed inside with Hitler until the end, now understood their situation clearly. There was no army coming to save them, no reinforcements, no chance of breaking out. They decided they would not surrender. Later that day, both men took their own lives inside the bunker, unable to face capture. Others were preparing for the opposite, surrender. They gathered white cloths, documents, medical bags, anything that could prove they were just staff or wounded soldiers. A few burned their uniforms and replaced them with civilian clothing, hoping to disappear in the chaos once they reached the surface. Some packed small bags with food or photographs. No one knew what the Soviets would do to them, but many feared torture or execution. In the radio room, a final message was recorded. It stated that Hitler had died as a soldier, fighting to his last breath. This was a lie, but it was sent across the remaining German lines to maintain some sense of pride. Shortly after sending it, the radio operators destroyed the equipment. There would be no more messages from the bunker. That afternoon, the Soviet forces closed in on the area above. Gunfire and explosions came from every direction. The bunker itself shook constantly. Some believed it could collapse. Others hoped it would collapse, so they wouldn't have to leave and face what waited outside. Finally, late on May 1st, the remaining officers gathered one last time. They agreed to try a breakout at midnight. It was almost impossible. The streets were full of Soviet troops, but staying underground meant certain death. The group split into smaller teams. Each team memorized a different route through ruined streets, tunnels, and sewer systems. Some people cried as they said goodbye. Some hugged each other. Others simply nodded and walked away silently. Just after midnight, the first group climbed the stairs to the surface. They stepped into a nightmare. The streets were on fire, buildings were destroyed, and machine gun fire filled the air. Bodies lay everywhere. The night sky glowed orange, lit by burning houses and artillery flashes. The group tried to run across a courtyard, but was quickly spotted. Soviet soldiers opened fire. Many fell instantly. A few disappeared into the darkness, hoping to reach the river. Most did not make it. Inside the bunker, people could hear the gunfire but didn't know who survived. Another group prepared to go next. They waited for the right moment, then ran into the streets. Some hid in collapsed buildings. Some crawled through ditches. Others tried the sewer system, which was flooded and dangerous. A few managed to reach the outer districts of Berlin, but most were captured or killed. By dawn on May 2nd, only a handful of people from the bunker were still alive and free. Everyone else had been detained or shot. The bunker itself was now surrounded completely. Inside, the last remaining staff members had no more hope. They burned documents, destroyed weapons, and cleaned out rooms to erase as much evidence as possible. They talked quietly, almost in whispers. Some prayed. Some sat alone in corners, unable to think or speak. They waited for the moment when the Soviets would finally break open the doors. On the morning of May 2nd, the bunker was quiet, not peaceful, but empty, tired, and defeated. Almost no one spoke anymore. Everyone knew the end had finally arrived. Soviet soldiers were already inside most of Berlin, and the area above the bunker was completely under their control. Around 6 a.m., loud banging echoed through the corridors. The Soviets had reached the main entrance. The remaining German soldiers tried to resist for a few minutes, but it was useless. They were outnumbered, exhausted, and had no leader left. Within a short time, the fighting stopped. The Soviets took control of the bunker without much struggle. The soldiers moved through the halls with flashlights, checking every room. They found officers who had taken their own lives, doctors sitting quietly with their hands raised, and secretaries trembling with fear. Some people tried to lie, claiming they were only cleaners or cooks, hoping to avoid punishment. Others admitted who they were, too tired to pretend. When the Soviets reached Hitler's private rooms, they searched every corner. They found blood on the sofa where he had died, and they collected documents, maps, and personal items that had been left behind. They wanted proof. Proof that Hitler was truly dead. Proof that the war's central figure was gone. Outside, the Soviets also discovered the remains of the burned bodies in the garden. The soldiers didn't immediately know who they belonged to, but they reported everything to their commanders. Later, those remains would become a major part of the investigation into Hitler's death. While the Soviets were securing the bunker, the rest of Berlin was also falling quiet. The fighting slowed down. German troops began surrendering in large groups, and civilians came out of basements, looking shocked and afraid. The city was destroyed. Broken buildings, fires, bodies in the streets, and rubble everywhere. The capital of the Third Reich was gone, replaced by ruins and smoke. The remaining German officers who had not killed themselves were now prisoners. They were questioned about Hitler's last hours. Most gave similar statements. He died on April 30th. He shot himself. His body was burned, and Eva Braun died beside him. The Soviets did not trust him at first. They suspected Hitler might have escaped, so they kept investigating for weeks, searching for clearer evidence. Inside the bunker, the Soviet soldiers gathered everything that wasn't destroyed: photographs, letters, furniture, even pieces of clothing. They treated the entire place like a crime scene. Every detail mattered. Every object could be important. They wanted to understand exactly what had happened in Hitler's final days. Many of the surviving staff members were taken away for interrogation. Some were in prison for years. Some never returned home. Others eventually wrote memoirs describing the chaos and fear inside the bunker. These writings would later help historians reconstruct the final 24 hours of Hitler's life. Soon after the Soviets finished searching the bunker, they sealed the entrances. No one was allowed to go inside again. The bunker became a silent, empty shell, a place that represented the collapse of a regime and the final act of man whose decisions had destroyed millions of lives. Above ground, Berlin slowly began to realize what had happened. Hitler was dead. His closest followers were gone. The Nazi government no longer existed, and the war in Europe was only days away from ending. For many people, it felt unreal, almost impossible to believe. The man who had once dominated every headline, every radio speech, every part of German life had died in a hidden underground room, far from crowds, far from power, far from the world he tried to control. The story of his final hours was only beginning to be told. In the days after Hitler's death, confusion spread across Germany and even among the Allies. Rumors appeared everywhere. Some said Hitler had escaped to the mountains. Others claimed he fled by plane to another country. A few insisted he was still alive and planning a return. These stories spread quickly because there was no clear public confirmation yet. The Soviet Union kept the discovery of the burned bodies secret at first. They did not immediately announce that Hitler was dead. Stalin even told some Allied leaders that he believed Hitler might have escaped. This created uncertainty and distrust between the Allies. The true details of Hitler's death would remain hidden for many years. Meanwhile, as more bunker survivors were interrogated, the same story kept repeating. Hitler and Eva had taken their lives on April 30th. The bodies were carried upstairs, and they were burned in the garden. These accounts matched each other closely, even when witnesses were questioned separately. At the same time, Soviet investigators carefully examined the remains found near the bunker. They collected jaw fragments and dental bridges and brought them to dentists who had worked with Hitler in the past. The dentists recognized the teeth immediately. They matched Hitler's dental records exactly. This was the strongest proof that the body was truly his. However, the Soviets still didn't share this information openly. They preferred to keep the details hidden, partly to maintain political advantage, and partly because they didn't trust the German witnesses. As a result, Many people in the world continued to doubt what had happened for years. As Europe learned more about the situation in Berlin, the war rapidly approached its end. German forces in Italy surrendered. German soldiers in northwest Europe surrendered. More and more regions gave up fighting as they realized there was no leadership left. On May 7, 1945, Germany officially signed an unconditional surrender. The next day, May 8th, was celebrated as Victory in Europe Day, the end of the war in Europe. People danced in the streets in London, Paris, New York, and many other cities. Millions felt relief, joy, and hope after years of fear and destruction. But in Germany, the mood was very different. The country was in ruins. Cities were destroyed, families were broken, and hunger was everywhere. The collapse of Hitler's regime left behind devastation that would take decades to recover from. As months passed, the world slowly learned more about the crimes committed during the Nazi era: concentration camps, mass killings, forced labor, and Holocaust. People began to understand the full scale of the suffering that had taken place. Hitler's final day became only one small part of a much larger and tragic story: the destruction caused by his leadership. In the following years, the bunker was sealed and later partly destroyed. The area above it was rebuilt. Today, it looks like any normal city street. There are no signs, no monuments, nothing that honors what once happened there. This was done on purpose, to prevent the place from becoming a symbol for extremists. The location where Hitler died is now just a parking lot behind apartment buildings in Berlin. People walk their dogs there. Children ride their bikes. Most passers-by don't even know what lies beneath their feet. And maybe that's exactly how it should be. His final hours do not deserve a memorial. They serve only as a warning, a reminder where hatred, extremism, and blind loyalty can lead. The world didn't lose a hero that day. It lost a dictator responsible for unimaginable suffering. His death did not erase the pain he created, but it did end the power he once held. For historians, the last hours in the bunker are important to study because they show the complete collapse of a regime built on fear and violence. They show how quickly power can disappear. And they show that even leaders who seem unstoppable eventually face consequences. After Germany's surrender, the Allied powers divided the country into occupation zones. Berlin was also split into 4 parts, controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The city was heavily damaged, and the bunker area was unsafe, filled with debris and broken structures. The Soviets continued to investigate the remains from the garden. They secretly moved the bones several times, burying and digging them up again as they tried to decide what to do. Finally, in the early 1970s, the KGB destroyed the remaining bones completely, leaving only a few fragments like the jawbone stored in secret archives. In the 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Russian officials finally confirmed the truth. They revealed documents, dental records, and even photographs that proved the remains belonged to Hitler. This ended many of the conspiracy theories that had spread for decades. Still, the bunker itself remained mostly hidden. The East German government did not want it to become a place of interest. They believed it might attract dangerous admirers of Nazi ideology. So they covered the area with new buildings, roads, and parking lots. Almost nothing of the original site can be seen today. Even historians agree that it is better this way. The bunker represents the end of a brutal chapter in history, not something to be remembered with pride. What happened underground in those final hours shows how a leader who used violence and hatred eventually destroyed himself and everything around him. The last 24 hours of Hitler's life also remind us that power based on fear collapses quickly. People who followed him for years abandoned him when his empire fell apart. His promises, speeches, and victories meant nothing in the end. He died not as a hero or a warrior, but as a dictator hiding in a bunker, surrounded by failure. Today, Historians study these events to understand how such a leader gained control, why people obeyed him, and how similar mistakes can be avoided in the future. Learning about this moment is important because it teaches us to recognize dangerous leadership, propaganda, and blind loyalty. This story also shows that every decision has consequences. Millions suffered because of his actions, and the world was changed forever. The end of his life does not balance the suffering he caused, but it does close a dark chapter in human history. Understanding the past helps prevent future tragedies. By studying these final hours, we learn more than just facts. We learn responsibility, critical thinking, and awareness. History is not only about dates and events. It is about understanding why people make certain choices and how those choices affect the world. Thank you for reading this retelling of the final 24 hours. The purpose of this text is not to praise or attack, but to educate and remind us of the cost of hate and violence. When we learn from the past, we protect the future.